There's a room under the palace nobody thinks about. No windows, just screens, a wall of them, gray and flickering, and the low hum that gets into your teeth after an hour and stays there long after you've gone up into the daylight. The watchroom, we called it, the eyes of the palace, and for 9 years I was one of the men who sat in the dark and watched. That's where it starts. Both of the times I'm going to tell you about start in that room, years apart, and I've never been able to keep them separate in my head, so I'm not going to try for you either. I'm going to tell them the way they live in me. Tangled. The night I saw the thing, and the day the prince came down the stairs to ask me about it. Both at once, because that's how memory keeps them, and memory's the only witness I've got left. The night first. It was late, third bell past midnight, the deadest hour, when the screens mostly show empty corridors and a sleeping kingdom, and a man fighting to stay awake in a humming dark. I'd done 1,000 of those shifts. You go a little blank. Your eyes move across the wall of gray and your mind drifts off somewhere warmer, and you catch the movement before you understand it, the way you sense a fly cross a room before you see it. There was movement on the screen for the old king's study. The old king was dying then. Had been dying for weeks, the long, slow kind, the kind where the whole palace holds its breath and the vultures circle so politely you could almost mistake them for mourners. His study was sealed at night. No one in. His papers were in there, his private seal, and everyone knew, the way everyone knows things in a palace without being told, his true will. The new one. The one he'd had drawn up after his mind cleared in his last good month. The one that changed things, that everybody whispered about and nobody had read. And on the screen at third bell, someone was in the sealed study. I leaned in. The screens were poor things, grainy gray, but I'd watched that wall for 9 years and I could read those bad pictures the way a shepherd reads weather. I knew the shape of everyone in that palace by how they moved, and I knew this shape. It was the queen. The second queen, the dowager-to-be, the king's late-life wife, Queen Sabine, the one the court was split down the middle about. Half thought her a steadying hand on a dying man. Half thought her a spider who'd married a fading king for exactly the moment that was now arriving. She was at his desk, in the dark, and she had papers in her hands. Now the day, days later. Hold the night where it is her at the desk and come up the stairs with me into the day, because that's how it lives in me. The prince came down to the watchroom himself. That doesn't happen. Princes don't come down to the watchroom any more than they come down to the kitchens or the drains. The watchroom is for men like me, invisible men, men who are part of the machinery. So when I heard boots on the stair, real boots, a real man's weight, and turned and saw Crown Prince Leon filling the doorway, I stood so fast I knocked my stool over, and the clatter of it was very loud in that humming room. He was the elder son. The good one, people said, though I've learned to distrust how easily the court hands out that word. But he had a straight way of looking at you, and he was looking at me that way now, and his face was the face of a man who hadn't slept and had decided something costly. His father was dead by then, died 2 nights after the night I'm telling you about. So Leon wasn't quite king yet. There's a span between a king's death and a new king's crowning, where the kingdom hangs in the air. And we were in that span, that dangerous weightless span where everything is decided and nothing is settled. He didn't waste words. He never did. He asked me if I was the man who'd had the watch the night his father's study was entered. And there it was, he knew. Someone had told him that the study had been entered, that there was footage, that the man who'd seen it was down here in the dark. My stomach went to water, because I understood in that second exactly what I was standing on top of. Not a piece of footage, a fault line, with the whole kingdom balanced on it. Back to the night, stay with me, I told you they're tangled. I watched her at the desk, Queen Sabine, and for a while I told myself it was nothing. She was the king's wife. Maybe he'd sent her. Maybe she had every right. The mind does that, it reaches for the innocent story first, because the innocent story lets you go back to being sleepy in the dark. I almost reached for it. But then she did the thing that killed the innocent story. She read a paper, held it up to the one candle she'd brought, read it close, her face doing something the bad gray picture couldn't quite show me but that I felt anyway across all those screens. And then she took that paper, that one paper, and she fed it into the candle flame. She burned it right there at his desk. She held it and let it burn down nearly to her fingers, and then dropped the last of it into a dish and pressed it out with the flat of her hand. And then she took another paper from somewhere in her robes, a different one, brought in with her, and she laid it in the drawer where the first had been, and she closed the drawer, and she smoothed the front of her robe the way a person does when they've finished a thing, and she took her candle and she left. I sat in the dark with the hum in my teeth, and I understood that I had just watched the succession of the kingdom get rewritten. The true will burned, a false one laid in its place, by the woman who stood to lose everything the moment the true one was read, and to gain everything if it never was. And I was the only living soul who'd seen it. The day, the prince in the doorway, the weightless span. He asked me plainly whether the footage from that night still existed. And here's the thing I have to make you understand, the thing that turned a piece of gray film into the worst 3 days of my life. The footage did still exist. I'd kept it. Against the rules, old footage gets wiped on a cycle, written over. The eyes of the palace have a short memory by design so that no one can ever assemble to complete a picture of what the powerful do. I should have let it be wiped. Everything in my training said let it be wiped. See nothing, say nothing. You are machinery and machinery does not keep secrets for itself. But I hadn't been able to. Some nights you watch a thing and you can't unwatch it, and your hand, almost on its own, moves the record to the one drawer the cycle doesn't reach. I'd done that. I had the night of Queen Sabine and the candle sitting in a drawer in the humming dark. So when Prince Leon asked me if it existed, I had a choice, and I had perhaps 2 seconds to make it, the same as that other guard in that other story I'll never tell, the one with the banquet, 2 seconds where the whole rest of your life forks. Because I didn't know which side he was on. Think about it the way I had to, in those 2 seconds. He was the elder son, the true will, the one she'd burned. Everyone whispered it changed things. What if it changed things against him? What if the old king, in his last clear month, had done something nobody expected, named the younger son, or a regency, or set conditions on Leon's crown? Then Queen Sabine burning it might have helped Leon. And here he was, asking if the proof still existed, not to expose her, but to make sure the proof of his own illegitimate path was destroyed, to finish what she'd started. If that was it, and I handed him the footage, I was handing the last evidence of the truth to the man with the most reason to bury it. I'd be the fool who carried the one candle in the dark straight to the people who wanted the dark. Or he was exactly what the court said, the good son. And he'd heard a whisper that his father's true will had been destroyed, and he'd come down into the dark himself, trusting no messenger, to find out if it was real. Because if it was real, then everything about to be built, his crown, his reign, the kingdom's whole next age, was built on a lie and a fire, and he could not live as king on top of that. 2 readings of the same straight-looking face, and a guard in the humming dark with 2 seconds to bet his life on which one was true. The night again, the smallest detail, the one that decided me, though I didn't know it yet. When Queen Sabine burned the paper, right at the end, just before she pressed out the flame, she stopped, for a moment, and she looked at the burning thing in her hand. And the bad gray picture caught something in how she held herself, some stillness, and I have thought about that stillness for years, and I believe. I can't prove it. The screens were poor. I believe she hesitated. I believe that for one moment the spider was a person, and the person knew exactly what she was doing and was sick with it, and did it anyway. I don't tell you that to forgive her. I tell you because it taught me something I needed 3 days later. It taught me that people are 2 things at once, that she could be a woman sick with what she was doing and a woman who did it. And so, Standing in front of Prince Leon, I understood that his straight, honest face and a hidden, rotten purpose could also live in the same man, but so could his straight, honest face and a true one. The hesitation on the night taught me that a face tells you nothing for certain, that I'd have to decide on something other than the face. So I decided on the only thing I had, myself, what kind of man I'd be able to live as after. I thought, if I give him the footage and he's good, the truth comes out. And whatever the will said, the kingdom gets the king the old king actually chose, and I helped that happen. And if I give him the footage and he's bad if he buries it, then at least I'm not the man who burned the truth twice. She burned it once. I won't be the second fire. I'll have handed it to the rightful heir's own son and trusted the blood to know its own father's wishes, and if he betrays that, the sin is his and not mine. I can live as a man who trusted wrong. I cannot live as a man who chose the dark on purpose. And underneath all of it, quieter, the thing I didn't say to myself in words but felt, the old king had nodded at me once, years back, passing in a corridor the way the good ones sometimes do, a tip of the head that said, "I see you, you exist." I'd given that dying man's eyes 9 years of my life, and his true voice, his last true wish, was sitting in a drawer in my dark room, burned out of the world everywhere but here. I owed him, not the crown, him, the man who nodded. So I told the prince the truth. I said yes, it exists. I kept it. And I watched his face as I said it, watched it the way I'd watched 1,000 gray screens, and I saw relief. The same relief I'd seen in reverse in Queen Sabine's hesitation. The relief of a man who'd been terrified the answer would be no. That's how I knew, not before, only then. He'd been afraid I'd say it was gone. A guilty man prays the evidence is gone. Only an honest one is relieved it survived. The two timelines meet here. The night and the day, the candle and the prince, the burning and the relief. They meet on the small screen when I played it for him. I sat him on my overturned stool, a prince, on a watchguard stool in the humming dark, and I found the record and I played him the night. His mother-in-law, the crown, the dowager queen, at his dead father's desk, reading the true will, burning it, laying the false one in its place. He watched it without a sound. His hands on his knees went white at the knuckles and stayed white. When it ended, he asked me to play it again, and I did, and he watched the burning a second time, and a thing went out of his face that I don't think ever fully came back, some last bit of belief that the world was kinder than it is. He didn't rage. I'd half expected rage from the whispers about him, the passion of the good son. But he just sat, gone very quiet, the way the truly wounded go quiet, and after a long time he said one thing, almost to himself, not to me. He said, "She held my children once. I let her hold my children." And I understood that the betrayal wasn't only about the will and the crown. It was that he trusted her, brought her into the warm center of his family, let her near the things he loved most, and all the while she'd been the spider at the desk in the dark. The crown he could fight for, the trust he couldn't get back. That's always the part that breaks them, never the politics, the trust. What happened to Queen Sabine isn't really my story, so I'll tell it short. The prince confronted her. Not publicly, these things never are. He took the footage and he went to her himself with 2 men he trusted and no more, and what passed between them no screen recorded and no guard saw. I've heard versions. I believe none of them fully. What I know is that within the month she was gone from the palace, retired to her family's estates in the east for her health, the court said, the same way it always says these things, the flood, the rotten foundation, the failing health. The false will was quietly set aside, the true one well. The true one was ash, but the prince knew now what it had said, more or less from what she let slip when he confronted her with the fire, and he chose to honor the spirit of it as best a man can honor a thing he can never read. I've chosen to believe he did. I've needed to. He was crowned, King Leon, a fair king, by all I ever saw from the dark, and the kingdom never knew how close it came, in one dead hour at third bell, to being something else. never knew that its whole next age turned on one tired guard's hand, moving a record to the one drawer the cycle couldn't reach. He came down one more time, years later when he was king and gray and I was older than I'd ever expected to get. Down to the watchroom, alone again, boots on the stair. I stood and knocked the stool over again. Same stool, I think, or its twin, same clatter, and he almost smiled at that. He didn't stay long. He'd come to tell me he was closing the watchroom. New men, new methods, the eyes of the palace moving elsewhere. My 9 years and the years after ending. And he'd come to tell me himself, which a king does not do, rather than let me learn it from a notice. The man who nodded son, come down to nod at me one last time. Before he went up the stair he stopped and he looked at the wall of gray screens, all those eyes that had seen everything and said nothing for so long, and he said the second of the only 2 things I ever really remember him saying to me. He said, "You could have given it to anyone, or no one. Why me?" And I told him the truth, which was the smallest, truest thing I had. I said, "Because your father nodded at me once." He understood it. I saw him understand it. A whole life of loyalty explained in 5 words and one remembered gesture from a dead man. He stood with that a moment. And then he gave me the nod, the same one, the tip of the head. "I see you. You exist," his father's nod, carried down a generation and handed to an old guard in a dark room about to lose his post. Then he went up into the daylight, and I sat back down on my stool in the humming dark, the last night of the eyes of the palace, and I watched the empty corridors of a sleeping kingdom that would never know my name. I think about her hesitation still. Queen Sabine with the burning paper, that half-second of stillness. I've decided it's the truest thing on all the film I ever watched, because it's the thing that's in all of us, the moment where we know exactly what we're about to do and how wrong it is, and we stand at the edge of it, and we either step back or we burn the paper. She burned the paper. I didn't. That's the whole difference between us, and it's not as wide as I'd like it to be. I came close that night to letting the record be wiped, to seeing nothing, to staying machinery. I had my own half-second of stillness with the burning thing in my hand, and I stepped back from it barely and moved the record to the drawer, and that small refusal was the most important thing I ever did, and no one will ever know I did it. That's the job in the end. To be the eyes in the dark that see the truth and keep it against the rules, against the cycle that's designed to forget, until the one honest hand comes down the stairs to ask. Most nights no one comes. You keep it anyway. You keep it for the dead king who nodded, and the dying truth in the drawer, and the half-second of stillness in yourself where you decided, once, not to burn the paper. That's all I was. A man at the monitors in the dark, who kept the one thing he wasn't supposed to keep. It was enough. Some nights in the hum, I still think it was the only thing that ever was.